Hey guys! Today we're going to build a dashboard that is able to pull news from the New York Times API. The general idea is to be able to write anything and get news back. So let's look for Apple, and we can get like the latest news for Apple. Let's take BMW for instance, and we can get like the news for that. So it's going to be dynamic. We're not going to style it that much, but I think it's a simple, funny project to do. So hope you enjoy it and stay tuned. Okay guys, so for this project we're going to use the New York Times API. And the general idea is that we want to send like a string to the API, word or a sentence, and we want to receive some news and articles back. So just get into the developer.nytimes.com and just go into sign in and create an account. You receive back an email with an activation link, so just click it and log in again. So after you're logged in, go into your email and click on apps. So here, let's create a new app. Let's give it a name like news dashboard. Just be careful not to have like any empty spaces here. After you have it, just go into APIs, and here we have all the endpoints for New York Times API. So we want to select the articles search API. So just click enable. You can play with the other ones, but let's keep that one for now. And click create. So after that, you'll be able to see your API key. So let's just grab it and let's start a new VS Code. VS Code, let's create a file. Let's call it pullnews.py. And that's basically it. So now paste your API key and add it to a variable called API key or whatever you like. And now we have to get like our URL to query our articles search endpoint. So let's go back to our New York Times developer API dashboard and let's click on APIs. Let's go into our endpoint article search API and let's just grab the example call. I recommend you to go through the documentation. It's very light to read, but for now let's just grab it. And here let's call it URL and let's add it in a f string. Okay, so now let's replace your key by our key, so API key in my case, and that's it. So the next thing is to import requests. Very standard library to handle HTTP requests. So if you don't have it, just pip install requests. Very fast. So after you have it, import it, and that's it. So now let's create a function to handle our requests. So let's call it pull news. And let's get an input of a query string or something like that. And let's use this query string. Because in our example call, as you can see, we are looking for election, right? So we don't want to look for election. Maybe we want, but we want something dynamic. So let's pass it the query string. So we are replacing our variable into the string, okay? We are using the queue. There are other ways to query the API. You can use the FQ for the filtered query, and we may use it in this tutorial. Let's see. But for now, let's just keep with a queue. Good. Now that we have that, let's just have like the response. So let's say requests.get because it's that get request. Let's pass our URL and we want a JSON back. Okay. So let's return the error and let's test it. So let's print the full news and let's look for Apple, for instance. Okay, So let's just forget to save the file and let's write it Python pull news.py. Okay, so now we have our response back. As you can see, this is on JSON format. It's a bit messy for now. There are a lot of keys. We are not interested in so many things. For now, we don't want to know the status. We only want the response. Actually, let's start by that. Let's add here response, just to get rid of some of the trash inside the response. And inside the response itself, there's something called docs. And that's also the key that we are interested on. So let's pass these two actually. So docs. Okay. And if we run the code again, still a bit messy, but is a bit cleaned. You can trust me, or you can actually look for the differences. But yeah, so inside our response, we have the several news related to our string apple. Okay, and we actually have a typo here. So yeah, still we have some responses. So the next thing to do is actually to check if we have some responses, right? So we don't want to get some errors in the future. So let's just check if the len of error is bigger than 0. Let's just, return the error. Otherwise, let's just return no news found. Okay, so that should help us dealing with some errors. Now to handle like this news a bit further, let's just get another helper function. This is kind of optional, but I wanted to do it here just to separate things a bit. And let's call it cat news. And we also have the same input, that actually this input is going to come from our dashboard in the future when we actually build a dashboard. But for now, let's just like get the news with the function pull news as we have here. Let's pass this query string. And now that's the important thing that we want to do. We want actually to filter like what we have from the response. We have still too many things. So I would like to have like a list of tuples, and these tuples will have each the abstract of the news that is on our response somewhere. You can look for it. I also like to have the lead paragraph and the time. So pub date, application date. Okay, and that's actually enough to get like just a sample of the news. If you want to go a bit further, just look into the response and actually take whatever you want. Okay, so you have a lot of options here. So to make it simple, let's just take these 3 keys for now. And let's return the news. So let's try again with our improve get news function and see if it's a bit clearer. So yes, n is not defined because I forgot that this was a list comprehension, and of course for n in news, right? So for each news on the news variable, so the response from the query of the API, we are just taking the abstract, the lead paragraph, and the publication date. Okay, sorry if I wasn't clear before, but now let's run it again and see what we get. So yeah, so now we don't have like the trash that we had before. We just have like each individual news with the headline, the leading paragraph, and the time. Okay, that will be enough for this small tutorial. So the next thing is to create the dashboard itself. Okay, so just let's create something called dashboard here, dashboard.py. And this is the standard dash. If you watch the other tutorials on the channel, you should be familiar with them. But if you don't, no worries. Just make sure that you have dash installed. So you have to pip install dash for components and dash HTML components. Okay, So just install these three things and you should be good to go. So after you have that, let's just start by importing them, right? So let's import dash. Let's import dash core components as DCC, make it shorter. Whoops, one. Let's import dash HTML components. I don't know how to write as HTML. Here I have a typo, of course. Components as HTML. Let's also take from dash dot dependencies. Let's import the inputs for our callbacks, outputs, and the state. Finally, we want to take from pull news uh, our model that we wrote like a minute ago. Let's import the function that we are going to use, the get news. Okay, so just not to have everything in the same Python file. You can separate it or not, it's up to you. And actually, let's import one more thing. So from dash dependencies exception, sorry. Let's import the prevent update. That's actually the standard imports for dash. So that's pretty much it. Let's start by initializing our app. So let's say that we want a dash app. So dash dot capitalize dash. And there are always two things necessary for each dashboard. So initializing the app, give it a layout, and actually run the server. So three different things. Okay. So for the initialization, we are done. Now we have to get the layout. So app.layout, and our layout it's going to start with a HTML div, and inside this div, our code will actually live. So let's start by having a DCC input. Okay. And here is where we are going to collect the string to query the API. So this is going to be dynamic. You're going to have a box. You're going to write in the box, and this is going to query the API and get a response back. So let's just give it like an ID. I don't know. So query string to make it, concise. Let's give it a placeholder. Just when you have nothing in the box, you want to have something written. So let's say please choose criteria, something like that, up to you. And finally, just let's give it a type of text. You can have different types like email or password. We're just going with the plain text. And that's it for now. So let's just look into it. So let's see if we have any typo. Probably we have, of course. Dash HTML components. Yeah. Okay. Let's save it and run it again. Seems fine. So let's then run it. So the third thing, right? So app.run server. And let's add a debug equal true to get the errors description. Yeah, that sounds good. So no errors. Let's open the dashboard. And as you can see, we have our box where we're going to write stuff to get the response from the API. Okay, so we be able to write Apple or whatever. We'll have our response back. Cool. So let's keep going and let's add more things to our layout. After our DCC input, we want to have our HTML.button because we want a button to actually search. Otherwise, this is going to be searching all the time that you're writing. So while you're writing Apple, right, is already looking for A, right? So we don't want that. We want to have a button to actually search. So let's call it search something, very simple, and give it an ID called search button, something like that. And finally, this is our last step on the layout. we want to have another div that is going to show our response, okay? Or content, let's call it content. Cool. This is it for the layout. So we are almost done. We just need to write our callbacks, okay? So to write any callback, we always have to get this decorator and call app.callback. And inside our callback, we always have to have two things. So the output and the input, okay? So let's start by the output. So our output is going to be content, right? So we want to output the result of this callback that is going to call a function, and we want to render it on our content div, okay? So let's say that we want to render it on the content, and we want to render it on children. So just in the children element, that means like in the thing inside the div, okay? So don't worry too much with this terminology. Let's then give it like an input, and our input is going to be our search button. Okay, so we want to do something when the button is actually clicked. So let's do a search button, and here let's take the n clicks. So the n clicks is actually the property that gives you the number of clicks that this button have been pressed. And every time that you click on the button, this callback is going to be activated. Okay? And that's actually the reason why we need a state. So this is the final one, but we have to get a state of the query string. So every time that the button is pressed, we want to know what is the value inside the box, right? So every time we click the button, we want to know what is written here. So let's go back there and let's take the value from the box, and that's everything. We just need to write our function. So let's call it get I don't know, the news, and here just be careful with the get the news because we already have get news. So get news callback, okay? And here let's get like our two inputs because we have an input for the input dependency and from the state. So let's get it first like the n or the v and the q for the query string. Something a bit simpler. So if the v is different than none, so we just want to get the news from the API. So we can call our function get news. Okay? So we can say get news q. And q, again, this is just our what is written inside our box. Okay? So else, so if our v is none, we are going to raise the prevent update. I also explained that in the previous tutorials, but if you didn't watch them, this is basically because every time that you open the dashboard, this variable n clicks from the button is going to be initialized with none. So that means it's going to activate a callback and it's going to run this function. And we don't want that. We just want to run this function when actually someone is clicking the button. So the value is not none, it's like 1 or 2 or 3. We can see like an example in a few seconds. So actually, yeah, let's even just return empty for now and see what do I mean by that. Let's run it again. Let's go back into our dashboard, and now we can see that we have a search button, and we can write our terms and just click search. So nothing will happen because our function is returning an empty string, but actually let's me show you what I mean by the none. So when we start our dashboard initially, let's just print the v, it is the number of clicks. So when we start our dashboard, and here we are initializing our dashboard again, you can see that this is printing none. Why? Because I have two windows. I have too many windows actually. So let me find the right one. So I have two windows using the dashboard, and they just opened, right? And each time we opened like the dashboard, this is actually writing the none. So the value v. So we don't want to do anything on these cases. So we are just raising the prevent update. Okay, so that's intuitive, I think. So let's keep going. And now we're going to have some additional HTML here. So let's start by getting like an empty list. And let's say that for n in news, because again, we already got the news here. So we have them. For each individual news in news, we want basically to have this HTML string. Whoops. We want to append some HTML inside, okay? And this is going to be three different things. So it's going to be our headline, it's going to be our leading paragraph, and it's going to be the date, okay? So let's just do html.div, and let's add inside this div our content. So let's get like h1 for the header, so html.h1. Here we want to have like this n0. So if we go back to our pull news, this is our abstract, so our header basically. We want to have also, and actually let's give it a class name, because we may need to change the CSS. So we also want html.p for our leading paragraph, and let's give it class name of just p. Yeah. And finally, we want to have like an html.p again, but this time for our date. Okay. So, and yeah, that's basically it. I guess we can see what we have back. So let's just replace this empty string by the HTML string, and let's run the dashboard again. We are just missing here a parenthesis, I believe. To close this parenthesis here, and this is not here. Okay, so we should be good to go. We are not good to go because we are missing the comma now. My apologies. But okay, now we are good to go. So let's go back to our dashboard. Let's take Apple. Let's click search. It's just taking a second or two. But okay, so we just have to take like this because we are appending a list. We don't want to append a list. We want to append a div, and this div has a list inside. That should be good enough. So let's actually run it again, and let's test it. So let's click Apple, and we should render our news. Yeah, so cool. We have a dashboard that is rendering news. So Apple unveiled 3 new Mac computers that use processors the company created itself. And then we have, the leading paragraph. So it looks actually pretty good. The only thing that we could add here is a bit of CSS. So let's just do it pretty fast and just one line of CSS or two. So let's just create a folder called assets. Okay. And inside assets, we want to create like a CSS file. Just call it style.css or something. Styles.css. And here on styles.css, let's just like do two things on the content and the title. Okay, just to make it a bit, smaller. So on the content, we want to define a width of 600 pixels and a height of something like 50 pixels. Okay, enough. And for the title itself and Just be careful because it's a class, it's not an ID. Let's just give it a font size of 20 pixels. Okay, and let's see. It's not beautiful, but it's slightly better, I believe. So let's do it again. And yeah, it looks reasonable. So now you can look for anything in your dashboard. You can look for Tesla, and you get the news for Tesla. You can get, I don't know, dogs, whatever. So it's your own search engine for news. Okay? And you can go further. You can get some sentiment analysis on that. Is completely up to you. So hopefully you liked the tutorial, and if you have any question, as always, just drop it on the comments. So see you.